All right, hello and welcome to this week's Coffee, Kegs, and Kriegsspiel. It is your host, James, and I am here today with Steven, and we are going to talk about his recently concluded game, the campaign of Vicksburg for the American Civil War. Thank you, Steven, for being with us.
Yeah, thanks. Pleasure to be here.
All right, oops, didn't mean to click that. Um, so why don't you start us off by, for those who maybe aren't familiar with what the Vicksburg campaign is, tell us what it was, and then maybe why you just wanted to do that one as an umpire.
Yeah, yeah. First of all, the Vicksburg campaign. I guess my inspiration for it was I was browsing. I was reading Grant's memoirs that kind of spoke about the Vicksburg campaign,
Mm-hmm.
and then from there I decided to do more research on that specifically, and I found out that he did some pretty innovative stuff at the time, like cutting loose from supply lines and doing all that stuff that later on would be pretty instrumental for Sherman's march and everything else during the later parts of the war. And I thought it was pretty revolutionary and kind of set Grant apart from the rest of the Civil War generals. So I wanted to try to recreate that. And also, one of the big inspirations I had was from Little Wars TV.
Mm-hmm.
They had a YouTube video that basically said, what if Lee supported the Vicksburg campaign, something like that. So I thought, maybe I could do something like that as well. So I wrote in to my little briefing document that Lee was stricken with typhoid, and then because of that, they decided to send reinforcements to Vicksburg, and the whole Gettysburg thing never actually happened. So
Interesting. Okay. Um, I guess let's start. Just tell us about the game. What happened? How'd it go? Who won?
yeah,
Or the major
so
events?
mostly what happened. I will say that I had a pretty big ambitions for this campaign. I tried to, because Grant's campaign, this Vicksburg campaign, was pretty much a masterpiece. It's kind of compared if you compare it to Napoleon's Italian campaign, like just the amount of luck and just innovativeness and the all that type of stuff that happened that Grant did. It's pretty hard to recreate for Kriegsspiel players,
Mm-hmm.
especially random players that you have to just jump in and just do different roles and all that stuff. So I will say it's pretty ambitious, and that was some of the reasons why I kind of got a little disappointed later on in the game. But that was just my own fault. But basically, how the game went was we started with a little bit of alternate history, because I like doing some kind of little alternate history stuff, changing the order of battle a bit, so that people can't just look up the Wikipedia and just see exactly what happened and kind of know your enemy.
Mm-hmm.
So from there, I started that Grant started out in Grand Gulf. Let me see if I could pull up the original part of it. Yeah, so this was the starting dispositions of both the of Grant's Army of the Tennessee, and we had the Confederates over in Jackson with General Johnston, and then General Pemberton over in Vicksburg. And the main idea for Grant was, let me see if I can pull up the actual objective he had. So the primary objective I told for Grant on the Army of Tennessee, which is to capture Vicksburg,
Mm-hmm.
which was the city up here. But as you can see, there was a lot of defenses that they already had pre-made, all that type of stuff. So it was going to be it was going to be a tough nut to crack, basically. Um, Secondary objectives I put for Grant was to occupy the state capital in Jackson or defeat a Confederate army in the field. So um, with those objectives, Grant decided that his best bet was to go the historical route, which is what Grant did. So Grant historically decided that he couldn't just siege Vicksburg with Johnston in his rear.
Mm-hmm.
So he decided that I'm just going to push straight for Johnston, try to split them in two and defeat them in detail. And that was what the player Grant did originally, and that's what he outlined in his plan. And then for the Confederate side, they had basically more or less the same thing. Primary objective was then to defend Vicksburg, but then also defending Jackson because it was the main supply conduit that fed into Vicksburg. So as you can see on this map, the only rail line that heads into Vicksburg is operated through Jackson. It's a central rail hub, so it's pretty important to defend. And then secondary objectives was, like I said, protecting the Vicksburg-Jackson Rail and defeating Grant's field army. So with that, Confederate General Johnston decided that he was going to do, again, kind of the same thing historically. He decided that he was going to try to unite his army as quickly as he could, bring Pemberton and Johnston together in order to get a numerical superiority over Grant. What I added in, because historically Grant or Johnston's army and Pemberton's army, I think, weren't actually as strong as Grant towards the end, or like by the end of the campaign, all the numbers allocated. So I decided to give the edge and do that little alt history stuff where I'd have off-map reinforcements come in. After a few days, depending on their decisions, they would come in and able to support Johnston from the Army of Northern Virginia, from Lee. So, yep. And that was basically how it all went down. That was the kind of the setting point for it.
So what happened in the campaign then?
Yeah, so what happened in the campaign, we had... It wasn't as well as I thought it would be. First of all, one of the big parts for the Union, their two commanders, or Grant, the player that was playing Grant Chackery, and the player that was playing the Chief of Staff, Rawlins, who was responsible for all the logistics, both had to be replaced kind of midway through or towards the beginning, which kind of left a big hole in the Union command, which really showed later on in the game as the logistics broke down and they weren't able to supply their troops. And then for the Confederates, they pushed in and just tried to move in around the area of Auburn, and I will pull that up for you real quick. But let's see. The broad strokes part of it, though, was that the Union just weren't able to capitalize on their speed and kind of push in and split the two armies in half. And that ultimately just ended up in the failure for the Union. And some interesting mechanics I had for the game in order to kind of simulate the different types of supply situations that Grant and Johnston had was I tried to give more speed to the Union and then less speed to the Confederates, depending on using their supplies and stuff like that. So I developed a kind of variable marching system, and I think some other games do that as well, like Zeke and Chief. So they really helped me inspire and do something like that. Let me just pull it up for you. So here, I don't know if you can see it. You should be able to see it.
Yeah, I can see it.
Right here. Yeah. So one of the things I thought that was pretty important to the game was showcasing the different variable marching to show that Grant was able to kind of cut loose of his supply line, but at the cost of only having a certain, I think, about 8 hours of ammunition in game terms, and maybe 1 or 2 days of food. So it required the Union to either move fast or spread out and kind of forage, and they didn't really do either of that, which ultimately led to their downfall. So
then why did they move so slowly?
I'm really not sure. I think they went pretty well in the beginning. They had some good ideas, but then once they kind of engaged with the enemy, I think to put it simply, they kind of lost the plot, and they just kind of bogged down and just started fighting. And then they kind of realized that, oh wait, we're running out of ammunition and food. So it was a pretty big problem for them towards the end. And then with the whole shifting of Grant, when they had to replace the player, Marco stepped in. He had to kind of inherit everything and try to figure out what was going on, and then from there just push on. And it was pretty hard, pretty big shoes for him to fill. So, yeah.
So where did the major fighting occur?
It was around Cayuga and Auburn. Let me see if I can pull it up. And one of the things I did do, which I thought worked pretty well, but it did become big umpire workload for me, was I had around 4 or 5 day turns for the global deadline for everybody. But in the beginning, or if the forces ever had any sort of battle where they met, I would turn it into daily turns for the engaged forces. And the idea was that it would maintain some kind of fog of war for the other players. And we would have some kind of resolution between our like global 4-hour turns. So here is one of these screenshots, I think, of my battle ones. The big one, I think, was around this time. It was very early on in the campaign, around like the second or third day. And it was between, here we go. So it was between McPherson's 17th Corps and Pemberton's Army of Mississippi. So how it worked was that Pemberton came in from this way, Baldwin, and he decided that he was going to try to cut or just move into Cayuga to try to block the enemy, the Union forces as they advanced, while Johnston would come in later. But what ended up happening is that Pemberton kind of moved too quickly. And even though he had some trouble here at the ford, because it was actually a ford, it wasn't just like it was a ferry crossing, not an actual ford. He had some trouble trying to get his whole force across. So you'll see back here, his wagons were left behind. But he pushed on to here, and McPherson was able to fight him here. And McLaren, who was another player, was able to come up and kind of support this area right here. So this is one of the big major fights. It ended up with Pemberton having to withdraw back up to Baldwin because he realized he was outnumbered, as two Union Corps were coming to push on him. And that eventually ended up in a pretty disastrous part for the Confederacy, but overall it actually didn't really affect much. Let me see if I can pull that up for you. But yeah, so eventually, as I said, Pemberton just was able to withdraw as night came through. But the ultimate result was that Pemberton's force was pulled back to Baldwin. McPherson and McLaren decided to push their attack the next day on Baldwin and try to surround Baldwin. But Pemberton had some good senses and was able to withdraw up along this route and then move over these bridges and get to safety. So the result was that one of Pemberton's divisions, I think it was Loring, he was captured over here at Baldwin for rearguard action, but ultimately nothing else really came of it, and Pemberton was able to salvage his command. So that was a pretty good thing, and that was probably one of the biggest fights of the game, because later on it turned out that the umpire workload was just too much, and I had a lot of real life stuff going on, but that was one of the biggest fights. The next fight would come on in Auburn a few days later, but I decided to, mostly just simulate that because of, like I said, umpire workload and a lot of real life stuff going on.
How long did it take you to process an average turn?
I would say about 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours usually. And that, again, is mostly, I was pretty used to that from the Operation Serpent campaign that I ran, the game before this, the World War II game. That was, again, around 4 hours, which I think is pretty okay for my time. Mostly just because I had so much stuff going on outside of my home. I wasn't able to come back to my PC and work on TTS and do all that stuff, actually process the turns, which really became a big detriment to me. So,
did anyone's strategies or orders or actions stand out to you within the game?
Yeah, so in my the actual AAR, I wrote up player and side evaluations, and I think one of the, a few players actually stood out very well for me. One was Grierson, which was the Cavalry Brigade of the Union, and let me see if they're on the map yet. So one of the things I had for the game was that the reinforcing players, both sides had reinforcing players. The Confederates had a whole new corps, which would be able to come in from north from Jackson. And the Union had Grierson's Cavalry Brigade, who just returned from a long raid outside the area of Vicksburg. So Grierson would be coming in from the south, and then the Confederates coming in from the north. And Grierson did really well in figuring out how best to get to the battlefield quickly. He did some pretty crazy stuff, like going, seizing a Confederate depot, doing all that sorts of stuff while he was making his way up here. And I think that really helped him speed his way up here. and get him into the fight much quicker than the Confederates could. And the way I did it was that while everyone else had normal turns, every turn, 4-hour turn, they would have updates and orders and all that stuff. For the people off map, the reinforcing players, I gave them like an update maybe every day or so or something like that, where they just had to make, a few key decisions about what they want to do. I kind of streamlined their decisions to make it easier for me, and then make it, simpler for them to just kind of choose, do you want to go option A or do you want to go option B? And Grierson, for the most part, did very well in choosing the right options and, getting to the battlefield faster. So big commendation for him on the Union side. And then for the Confederate side, I think you did very well, James, commanded the cavalry for the Confederate side. I think you understood the ideas of like what you should be doing, which was both like kind of screening and doing all this other stuff, which actually caused Grierson to kind of turn off and get distracted for a little bit, which was really good. Let me see if I can figure that out where it was. But you sent a brigade or one cavalry detachment off to try to conduct a raid, and it basically drew all of Grierson's troops away. So that was really helpful. And then later on, you understood like how to work with reconnaissance and screening, which is really important for cavalry at the operational level. Let me see. And then one more person, I think Greenlee, who played Adams, the chief of staff for the Confederate side, did really well in understanding how logistics worked. He constantly was working with using both like rail transport and other forms of transport to make sure that the Confederates had their supply situation sorted without them having to worry about it, which I thought was really smart and really important. The Union side, as I said, they suffered really badly with that, and it was actually more important for them to be on top of their logistics because they were running out of food, running out of ammunition, and they didn't have anyone really helping them. So it was rough. But yeah, I would say, that one battle actually that you did was really good. It was your little raid on the Union guns, which kind of shocked them and kind of made them figure out that, hey, we should probably not march in these certain ways. And I will say a lot of people on the Union side were pretty new to Kriegsspiel, but I think they did very well given that. But they just did some kind of small mistakes, leaving their artillery open and all that kind of stuff. But let me see if I could find that one battle, which I thought was really good. There we go, the skirmish at Cayuga. And I'll pull this up, just kind of show some quick things. So, as you see here, this is your cavalry skirmish. You saw that the Union line was strung out, and the way they did it, they thought that they could move they did actually, in fact, move their infantry faster if they put, all their wagons and artillery and basically everything that was horse-drawn would be in the back. And the result was that their infantry could move a little faster, but at the cost of their artillery moving slower. So when you were positioning, you found that the Union artillery was in the back. They had no rear guard, and then so you decided to pounce on it, and actually worked very well. You're able to push in, take their guns, do something like that. But, you also figured out that your cavalry, you're not going to be able to withstand against, brigades of Union infantry. So you understood that take your losses or, take your win, get out, do a quick hit and run. And I think that was very perfectly executed for a cavalry commander. So that was really good.
Oh, good.
Cool. And then one thing I will say for the Union side, one of the players that did I would say not too well, was Merrill, who was McLaren's corps. And let me pull that up for you. But he did pretty well in the beginning. He supported McPherson in that one battle to capture Loring Division from Pemberton. But afterwards, he chased Pemberton up towards the bridge, which is actually right here. Pemberton has a strong defensive line. McLaren thought that he could just line up on this bridge and just kind of maybe pound the Confederates in order to make them withdraw or just assault across. And that ended up in a very terrible losses for McLaren. And we'll see right here that he also eventually actually just ran out of ammunition and food, and he did really nothing about it. And he was basically just banging his head against the wall, trying to figure out how to destroy or, dislodge Pemberton, and it just didn't really work. He did manage to get a flank around on this other crossing that Pemberton left unguarded. But because he did it with such a small force, Pemberton was able to quickly turn around and eliminate this force and then basically do nothing. So, and at the same time, another good cavalry action from you. You came in, disrupted him, made sure that he couldn't really do much in here. And overall, the Union just, like I said, they kind of lost the plot once they started fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Their whole idea was try to move quickly, try to split the two armies in two, and they just kind of just stopped doing that. And I'm not sure why, but it could be as the game progressed, they kind of lost sight of what they were trying to do, and no one was able to remind them and keep them on track. So
that happens once you get into the fight. You kind of forget.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, tunnel vision, sure. I would say. Yeah.
What would you do if you? I guess what learnings did you take from this campaign that you'll carry on to other games?
Yeah. I think like I said, umpire workload was very rough. I started out pretty good, and I was able to do some pretty fun. I was enjoying the turns and doing all that. But later on, I realized that I bit off more than I could chew, which I think most umpires say, as they do these kind of games. But one of the big takeaways that I have was an umpire team would be really nice with some kind of assistant umpires with delegated responsibilities. Because one of the things I did was I had a lot of different features that really I thought contributed very well to the realism and the experience. Mm-hmm. Like logistics and all that stuff, and something that they'd have to figure out and manage individually. And I think ultimately having some kind of assistant umpires that can help with logistics or help with my AI dispatches, which was another thing that I used to try to keep it more realistic. Whereas if players sent a dispatch or some kind of orders to their subordinate units, I would send a dispatch back and actually give them some kind of report as playing as one of the players or one of the subordinate commanders. So if I had an assistant umpire to deal with just AI dispatches or just the logistics, I think it would have gone much smoother, and it would have helped with the kind of the umpire workload. So that's one of the big takeaways. Another thing, a player primer is very interesting or very important. I think both Zeke and Chief do very well in their operational games to give a primer for the players so that it gives them guidelines and it gives them some sort of it contextualizes what they're supposed to do, and it helps eliminate the questions and give them something that they can work on. I really did not do that. I instead kind of did the approach of you can do whatever you want, and because of that, it kind of got a little too over my head. But at the same time, I think that was really important to kind of allow the players to be as dynamic as they want, and I think the players enjoyed that for the most part. But I think a primer would actually help, contextualize it, like I said. And the incomplete maps I originally tried to do, I think it worked a little bit, but I think it was too much for this game specifically. I would like to do it again in some other game. But what I'll say is that this was kind of my original idea. So this was the USA side. The Union had just this map to work on. So they didn't have the actual map. Their screenshots showed the actual map, but they didn't have, this is what they worked on for their planning. Mm-hmm. So as you can see, all different things. They don't really have the maps. The roads are all different. Some of the towns aren't even the right ones, and stuff like that. And I think it really added to the realism, but it didn't really work in the grand scheme of things and actually making it interesting and fun for the player. So I think I'll definitely do it in some other way for that. And then my final point would be I need to do more research on cavalry, operational cavalry, basically their capabilities and limitations, what they are actually capable of doing, because I think my mechanics for the cavalry were a little too it wasn't really taking into account their fatigue, and it basically allowed them that they were just fresh after every morning. If they found some kind of water source, by the next morning they were completely fine. The horses were good to go. So, and I've actually, because of that, I found a book called Lincoln's Cavalryman. I've been reading that pretty frequently to try to figure out what more stuff kind of the operational level of cavalry can do, so that we can make it a better,
it was annoying,
more realistic experience
as a cavalry commander, because my map didn't exactly match the real map either. So
Hmm.
sometimes I expected a stream to be in a spot and it wasn't, and so I had to double back
Yeah,
to find it to camp for the night. So that was kind of
yeah,
fun and annoying, but
yeah. And I think that was interesting. And like the idea I had for that was I was trying to encourage in the briefing documents for each side to like use your engineers or like use scouts to like go out and draw out the map. But players, I guess they did that in the very beginning, but then they also, like I said, they kind of lost the plot and they just ended up not doing that at all. And I think I could make that easier somehow by maybe doing it um, automatically instead of like having them push out scouts and like scout for them. But yeah, I did like the idea of it, but I think it was just a little too much for this game style. So
okay.
yeah,
I think that was mostly most of my questions. Anything
yep.
else that you wish I had asked or that you wanted to talk about that I didn't?
Um, I will say that I really enjoyed this game. I think one day I might be able to do it again. But I think ultimately my original intentions for the game and like I had my hopes for this game, I think, were way too high. My expectations were set way too high, and the result was that I didn't really have much of a good time towards the end because I saw that I guess the players weren't really doing what I expected them to do,
Yeah.
and that's that again that's pretty common for Kriegsspiel, and but in some ways I was just disappointed in that because I expected more, and then because of that, it didn't really bring me a good time for it. So I would say that if I want to do another game, I think I would do less, something a little more easier in a scenario
Mm-hmm.
because the scenario, like I said, it was very hard. Grant, pulled off a pretty big miracle to have this happen behind enemy lines, do all that sort of stuff. Um, and yeah, I think that's what I probably do next time. And then I was thinking of doing another World War II game because that I think had a lot more fun. Uh, like the appeal for it was a lot bigger than Civil War, and I think people are it's easier to understand kind of World War II tactics and fighting and all that kind of stuff than it is Civil War in some ways. So especially at the operational level. So yeah, and I think logistics are pretty important at the operational level. I will say, and I think I did a pretty good job at figuring out how to make the logistics work because I do love doing individual pieces for logistics.
Mm-hmm.
I think that really simulates it well instead of having like an invisible line of communications. Um, and variable marching, I think, is another really big thing for operational gameplay because you're not going to expect your 20,000 man force to march at the same speed. So in some ways, parallel marching, using different roads, stuff like that stuff is really important for operational gameplay. And I'm glad that most games that we have that. So I'd hope to see more of variable marching and logistics in operational games. So yeah,
All right. Well, thank you for your time and going over for the game, and thank you for running the game. As a
yeah,
player in the game, it was a lot of fun to
yeah.
play in. With that, I see we have one audience member, so I'm going to see. I can't see his name. I think it's something with an R, but raise your hand if you have a question. I'll give you 2 seconds. Otherwise, we will. Oh, he's raising his hand. Okay, here we go. I'm going to invite you to speak. Go ahead and accept and ask your question. There you go. It shows you're muted at the moment.
All right, just typing in text.
Okay. No, not inbox. Is there picture, visual content? Oh, your mic went bye-bye. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then, I guess we won't have a question. That's all right.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop recording. Thanks, everyone, for listening
Yep.
in.